Hello and welcome to Armenian News Network Groong Week in Review. Before we begin, we appreciate your help in reaching a wider audience, so please don't forget to subscribe and like us on whatever platform you listen to us on, and help spread the word by sharing this podcast on your social media channels. Thanks in advance. I'm 𝐊𝐫𝐸𝐺 𝐿𝐚𝐤𝐤𝐚𝐴, and along with Asbet Bedrosyan, this week we're going to talk about the following major topics. Constitutional Court appointments, Armenia's national debt, calls for the resignation of the Minister of Education, escalated tensions on the Armenian-Azeri border, Khodorkovsky publishes leaked Russian documents on Armenia and Azerbaijan, Bob Dole was hired by Embassy of Armenia as a lobbyist in Washington, D.C. To talk about these issues, we have with us Hrant Mikhaelian, a political scientist and multidisciplinary researcher in social sciences based in Yerevan. He is also a senior researcher at the Caucasus Institute. Emil Sanamyan, a senior research fellow at USC's Institute of Armenian Studies, specializing in politics in the Caucasus with a special focus on Azerbaijan. And Alen Zamanyan, who is a software engineer in Los Angeles who has analyzed Armenian politics for over a decade.
Welcome, everyone. This past week, the National Assembly voted to approve all three nominated candidates to the Constitutional Court. Both opposition parties in the parliament refused from participating in the vote, as well as the entire constitutional process. 𝐊𝐫𝐸𝐺, can you talk a little bit about the old and the new judges?
I'll just briefly mention that there are three judges who were dismissed by the power of law. They are Alvina Gulumyan, Felix Tokhyan, and Hrant Nazaryan. Hrant Tovmasyan is also no longer recognized as president. So some of these judges have actually taken their case to the European Court of Human Rights. As far as the three new nominees, the parliament's pick was Edgar Shatiryan, a 40-year-old law lecturer. Now, he made news last year when he quit his role as a member of a parliamentary committee on corruption, and that seems to have happened after it became clear that he wasn't going to be voted as the president of that committee. The president's pick was Artur Vagarsyan, chair of jurisprudence at the Yerevan State University. He was nominated once in 2018, but rejected by the parliament at that time. And some constitutional lawyers have raised the question whether someone can be nominated for the same position twice. The last pick is from the Judicial Council, and his name is Yerevan Tkhunkarian, who has, for the past 2 years, led the Court of Cassation, the highest body of criminal and administrative jurisprudence. For him, critics brought up the fact that he has a long history of being a judge during the former regime, and specifically he made rulings that affected the case of A1 Plus, the TV channel, which resulted in the depriving of airtime for that channel. Personally noteworthy for me is that the Constitutional Court is now faring worse in terms of diversity, with only one woman left on the court. Upon Parliament's approval, Prime Minister Pashinyan then declared the constitutional crisis as done in Armenia. Emil, is this the case?
Hello, everybody. Yes, the constitutional crisis was announced by Prime Minister Pashinyan, as was the end to the constitutional crisis, has also been announced by Prime Minister Pashinyan. So this is of his doing, and this is of his sort of ending kind of thing. It just shows the nature of centralized nature of political power in Armenia, where a powerful prime minister can initiate something like this and end it, just as he initiated. So it went through a couple of stages. The initial trigger was the Constitutional Court accepting 𝐾𝐤𝐤𝐚𝐴 case back in May 2019. Initially, they decided to replace 7 out of 9 judges. That didn't work out. There was some opposition from Europe. They basically backtracked. They went to the route of retiring 3 out of 9 judges. First, they thought they would do it through a referendum. Then, because of the pandemic, referendum was cancelled. And now it came down to basically Pashinyan's party voted to remove them. They're appealing it, but it looks like by the time their appeals might go and might get hearing in Europe, there might be another totally different constitutional court. There's also a notion that there might be a bigger package of constitutional changes, and the constitutional court might just be totally removed as an entity. We'll see what happens, but again, Pashinyan's objectives here were twofold. Number one was to make sure that the Constitutional Court does not weigh in on the 𝐾𝐤𝐤𝐚 case in favor of 𝐾𝐤𝐤𝐚. That's number one. Number two is that the current chairman of the court, Hrant Tovmasyan, is replaced because he basically had the goal of standing up and challenging Pashinyan, talking about like he was going to defend the court, to defend the law, the way soldiers defend their trenches, whatever. So it's clear that neither 𝐇𝐫𝐴Z𝐷 nor the other judges were really gung-ho about fighting Pashinyan. So I think it seems like they've settled down for a sort of a midway option where they are basically replacing three, old judges from experienced judges from the court with three lawyers, two of them judges, that essentially come from the same system. There are some questions about their corruption or corruptibility. There are also some questions whether Vaghasyan being re-nominated for the second time, just like what's his name, Vahai Grigoryan was renominated for the second time.
Amen. So about corruption, that has been the main narrative and reason given for reforming the Constitutional Court. But what is your opinion? What effect on corruption does the Constitutional Court have, or could have in the future?
I mean, it's not directly involved in any of the corruption proceedings or anti-corruption proceedings. It's a court that judges constitutionality of laws or other government decisions. So the problems with the Constitutional Court has been, the corruption of the Constitutional Court has been about Constitutional Court not having their members not having the political or personal wherewithal to stand up to the executive in the past. So you would have elections that were questionable. There was one ruling that they took after 2003 elections that was sort of a half and half type of ruling that sort of semi-endorsed opposition claims of fraud. But generally, they would never, except for a couple of exceptions, they would not stand up to the executive when there was abuse of power by the executive. And we're in the same situation right now. We have a very strong executive. The current court initially tried to oppose the executive, but it seems like their resistance has been stymied. So we are basically in the same situation we were 10 years ago, where we have a court that does have some members that are more inclined to take opposite decisions, but mostly a court that's pliable, that will listen to the instructions from Prime Minister's office.
Emil, as you say that it didn't have the backbone to stand up to the executive, it's very interesting because when they did have the backbone to stand up to them, the executive went into this whole process to replace them.
Exactly.
Right. So do the new appointees represent a less corrupt cadre to actually let the government get on with its anti-corruption agenda?
Yeah, I think this whole discussion of corrupt, not corrupt, I mean, some people can be corrupt under certain circumstances because they're weak or because they're, for whatever reason. It's not about individuals. It's not like if somebody's, did something corrupt 10 years ago, he will be corrupt forever. Or if somebody has not been corrupt up until now, he would not be corrupted by the system. So it's always about how power is abused. It's about opportunities being seized. That it's about a culture being developed over many years of opposition being, becoming a natural phenomenon for courts to stand up to the executive and not coming under, executive's wrath. So far, we haven't had that culture in Armenia, and so far I don't really see, that culture being developed by current government's actions.
So you also mentioned that this whole institution of the court might go away, the constitutional court might go away. After this process of replacing the judges, what does it say about the independence of the courts in Armenia?
Well, we have independent judges. We have judges that have taken very unpopular decisions. The 𝐀𝐤 case has been a central case. With the judge who released them on bail took a lot of grief for it. A couple other judges who did it before also took a lot of grief for it. So they took independent decisions, even though they knew that there would be consequences, both on the social level and from the government. So we have some inklings in the system, maybe beyond the Constitutional Court, of independence. And some of the members who were ousted, like 𝐼𝐤 𝐤𝐚, also projected some independent streak there. So the Constitutional Court initially, we discussed this in one of our first programs, initially was created basically as as a shop for 𝐾𝐬𝐤, right? 𝐾𝐬𝐤 was retired as the vice president, and he went to work as the Constitutional Court chairman. Now it doesn't seem like Nikol Pashinyan wants to sort of create or keep this court as a shop for any of his number twos or whatever. He doesn't have number two, seems like. So it becomes irrelevant. I mean, it's a small country with a 4-tier system. I don't think there is a real need to have a constitutional court unless it becomes an institution through its action, showing setting example for other branches of other parts of the judiciary branch.
Moving on, I'd like to talk about Armenia's national debt. Over the past few years, from time to time, Armenia's opposition has made references to the growth of Armenia's national debt, reminding Prime Minister Pashinyan of his tenure as an opposition MP when he staunchly criticized the expansion of the debt during Ser Sarkisyan's times. The number I've heard varies from 7.6 to 8 billion. Hrant, where do we stand with Armenia's national debt, and how do we view its trajectory? What are the components that make up for the increase in debt? Is it all related to COVID?
National debt of Armenia has generally grown during the pandemic. We have the data up to beginning of August. We don't have more recent data yet, but from what we know, we see that the debt was probably continuing growing after that in August and September. Now it has already reached 8 billion. 7.6 billion is a bit outdated figure. And main part of it is an external debt, which is 6.1 billion, and there is internal debt, which is 1.9. And during pandemic, Armenian debt has grown at least by $600 million. So it's less than 10% increase, which is not that big yet in reality, because if we compare it to the 2008 and 9 crisis, at that time the growth of debt was much bigger, and Armenia used much wider stimulation for budget. But now some stimulus measures are applied to consumption directly, to some people, to businesses, so it all requires money. If you look at the GDP growth, in second quarter it fell by 13.7%, and it's rather big number. But what is even bigger is that if you exclude two factors, which are decrease of imports and increase of government spendings, you would see that GDP would decline by 25%. So government spending now plays crucial role in combating crisis. Many even criticize the government because of minor size of the programs which counter crisis.
That was going to be my next question. Should the current environment and situation, and also the I guess apparently low rate of interest, be used as an opportunity to acquire more debt? I believe Hrant Bagration was saying, maybe even 2-3 billion more to fuel growth and invest in infrastructure projects.
Yeah, increasing national debt is not advantage or problem itself. If the government would have proper projects, if the effect of the projects would be calculated, then yes, might turn out that increasing debt by some new payments and which have low interest rates might not be a big trouble. But since we don't have such projects, it's hard to say whether it will be effective or not. It might not be, because sometimes it might be just overspending. So generally, I think the government applies a conservative monetary policy because they don't know how long the crisis will last. And this is the biggest issue with this crisis so far, because usually the crisis passed in 1 year, let's say, but this time we don't know. It might. Everyone was expecting it from the beginning. In March, the majority of publications were expecting it to be over by now. So now we see that it might be extended by 1 or 2 years more, and this is a major problem. So if it might last long, then the conservative monetary policy is right, because we will have to get new debts. We will have to have new programs countering crisis, and Armenia does not have that much reserve to take so many new loans. So I think in this term, Hrant Bagration might be theoretically right, but not practically right in Armenian case right now.
Over the course of last year, we've been hearing calls for the resignation of Minister of Education, Science, Culture and Sport, 𝐼𝐸 𝐤𝐚𝐧. This past week, Բարգավաճ Հայաստան and Լուսավոր Հայաստան failed to pass a non-binding resolution in parliament, as 𝐬𝐞𝐤, who has majority, voted against the measure. Alen, what are the complaints against his performance? Is this process unnecessarily politicized, or are there some real grounds for demanding his resignation?
I'd say there's sort of a multitude of factors that have contributed to the discontent. For one thing, the main complaint I feel like is this sort of ideological shift in policies related to education. So, for instance, removing or making Armenian language lessons not mandatory in universities. That was the first big outcry a little over a year ago, I think, or around a year ago. Then making changes to the standards for schools, where, for instance, church history would be removed as a separate subject and would be combined with regular history lessons. Other changes include focusing more on international literature versus Armenian literature, and in general, it seems like there's a little bit of a ideological shift here, and that's kind of raised a lot of concerns. And part of the reason is because of some of the individuals affiliated with the changes, many of whom have a long history of working with a certain set of NGOs. For one, there's an individual that was involved with the EU project for reconciliation between Turkey and Armenia, and that person is involved now with basically working on the Armenian history curriculum for schools.
Alan, we have done a detailed show on the topic of the education curriculum criteria a month ago, so I'd urge our listeners to listen to that episode if they can. We'll link it in the show notes. And 𝐼𝐸 𝐤𝐚𝐧, specifically in reference to this, mentioned that not much material related to the education criteria came up during the parliament hearing itself.
So I do agree. Actually, I listened to the parliamentary session, calling for his resignation, and to be honest, I didn't find the arguments very convincing. I felt, for one thing, I feel like this has been brewing for a while. Certain civil society organizations, the Armenian Revolutionary Federation, they've been kind of spearheading this, these protests against 𝐼𝐸 𝐤𝐚𝐧. Only recently, the parliamentary opposition decided to pick up this topic. I feel like it's actually gained a lot of resonance in the public. The public is realizing that some of these changes are not what they were looking for. They were, a lot of people thought that education needs reform, changes need to be made, but rather than kind of destroy or have radical changes in, the direction of education, there were kind of lower hanging fruit, more tangible results that we could have in other ways, and the public is kind of buying into these protests. So I feel like the parliament is kind of just trying to appropriate this discontent and kind of make it take it on and present it as their own cause. But I felt like they didn't do a great job of it. A political party like the ARF, if they were present in the parliament, it would have been a much more substantive dialogue. I feel like it would have been on ideological grounds as opposed to some of the arguments that they brought up, which weren't great.
I'd like to get Your opinion, Alan and Emil, on what the importance of this portfolio and Harutyunyan himself is to 𝐵𝐴 or 𝐀𝐫𝐴. It seems that they all lined up to defend him, even when he himself has been very combative with his critics, bringing up 𝐂𝐦𝐢𝐤 past rape conviction, which has subsequently been overturned. Or in the past, he has called his opponents, I think, as dimwits. To protesting ARF youth, he responded by threatening to send boxes of corruption lawsuits to the prosecutor's office, a threat which he hasn't delivered on yet. I believe he even alluded that students who were protesting the fairness of the university exam process were somehow linked to the former regime. Is there a reason that 𝐵𝐴 is defending him so staunchly?
Yeah, I think Aray Harutyunyan is one of the most loyal members of Nikol Pashinyan's inner circle. Is one of his trusted lieutenants, I would say, and he's been there from the beginning. I feel like removing him from office or giving in to these demands for his resignation would be a major blow to Pashinyan's own rating. I don't see it happening. I feel like they're gonna keep supporting him for the foreseeable future.
It seems like Aray Harutyunyan has become sort of a man to pick on from early on. Remember, there was this theater production that nobody liked and everything else. It seems like the sectors he oversees, education, culture, etc. They're very easy to trigger people. So he's become a very early on easy target to go after. And it's natural that the government would be defending him. And I personally, I haven't followed the education policy reform, and I'm definitely not an expert in it, but it seems highly politicized, all of these attacks on Aray Harutyunyan. I think that there is no doubt the system needs to be modernized. I think it's too inward focused on Armenian history, Armenian church, etc. I don't think those are the subjects that are necessary to be in the curriculum personally. But of course, other people disagree. So just 2 cents on that.
So I can think of maybe a few more points. For example, one of Harutyunyan's deputies is currently being tried for corruption. Also, during his first months as a minister, he publicly threatened to launch a corruption investigation against 𝐴IB, a private school, and then this didn't materialize. Aren't these legitimate grounds for calling for his resignation?
Well, there is always material to base a complaint on. It's just a matter of whether, the guy's been minister for a couple of years. Has he done something as bad as his predecessors? I really haven't seen that. It's look. I would rather just defer this issue to people who are, more involved in this education system. I think there has to be some kind of metrics involved there, and to see whether there is a progress in the Armenian educational system. What are the main obstacles that parents and students feel there are? How they're being addressed. So far, the attacks on Aray Harutyunyan have been very, coming primarily from political parties. I haven't seen big protests against him from students or parents or something like that.
There were some disagreements that were mentioned between 𝐂𝐸𝐤𝐚𝐧𝐿, I think, and Aray Harutyunyan.
𝐂𝐸𝐤𝐚𝐧𝐿 are not students of, 𝐂𝐸𝐤𝐚𝐧𝐿 is a separate entity. I don't think they should be involved in this at all.
So, Alan, any other points you wish to bring up?
I did want to mention, there was also an issue of sort of failed implementation of certain policies. Earlier this year, the ministry made a change to combine entrance exams for colleges, and also implemented kind of a new protocol for matching students to universities. And they kind of botched the rollout of that plan. And that caused a lot of discontent because a lot of applicants to universities kind of didn't get admitted to any university, or got admitted to a university they didn't want to. It was basically poor matching. But more important than the issue of the matching was just everyone was poorly informed about what was the change that was taking place, and they didn't properly strategize. So there was a lot of kind of objective discontent, it seemed like, from the students and parents. So that's one complaint that I can point to in recent memory.
All right, let's talk a little bit about escalated tensions on the Armenian-Azerbaijan scene. This past week, Junior Sergeant 𝐁𝐫𝐸 𝐺 was killed during an escalation of hostilities while on duty at a military position in the northeast part of the Armenia-Azerbaijan state border. The Ministry of Defense said that Azerbaijan has become more active on the border during the last 2 weeks and is attempting to reinforce its positions, which led to the incident. And this escalated level of tensions was also confirmed by Tavush Governor Haig Chobanyan. Emil, explain a little bit what's going on here, tactically speaking.
Tactically speaking, what I noticed is that Azerbaijan, maybe a day or two before our Armenian serviceman was killed, Azerbaijan reported one of its soldiers wounded by Armenian fire. So, and the Armenian statement about reinforcement, it's sort of recurring type of thing that happens on the border when new positions are being built. Obviously, soldiers become exposed, and when the other side starts firing, the other side returns fire. Tit for tat action is sort of like the bread and butter of this war. But generally speaking, it's the situation on the front line has remained very calm over the past month, except for this 1-2 incidents. The rhetoric from Aliyev that we heard over the weekend is of concern, this is something that is going to be of concern for the immediate future in many years. Armenia and Azerbaijan sort of look like those tired old boxers are kind of dancing on and trying to find a way to not knock each other out, but to sort of land the blow. So after what happened in July, I'm sure Azerbaijan, Aliyev is looking for a way to kind of land a return blow on the Armenian side. So that's where we are right now.
Actually, just like you mentioned, 2 days ago, I think Aliyev declared the negotiations stalled in a mothballed state, I think the translation was. And then more regionally, a few days ago, Azerbaijan refused the airspace to a routine Russian AWACS patrol. So despite the fact that they were successful in involving Turkey more deeply into their affairs, is it what do you think? Are they feeling like they can start sparring with Russia right now? Why all this rhetoric?
Well, certainly after the July events, we've had basically a deployment of Turkish forces in Azerbaijan. It's unclear, it hasn't been codified whether how temporary this deployment is, but this is unprecedented scale of deployment. They have basically half squadron based in Ganja of F-16s. They also have a token, but contingents in Nakhchivan and in throughout Azerbaijan. They have advisors. There was one story that came out that there was a conflict between the chief of the Navy of Azerbaijan and the chief Turkish advisor to the Navy, and it just tells me that basically Azerbaijan and Turkey agreed to return all of these Turkish advisors they used to have in the Turkish in Azerbaijani military at different levels, return them into the military, and sort of like another way to kind of reinforce the discipline, the effectiveness, etc., and management. So this is what's happening right now. It's not clear to me where they are in terms of preparations, but they're preparing to sort of have a moderately probably sized but substantial sized drone war against Armenia, more likely against the Artsakh stretch of the border with the Armenian side. So it's that's where it is right now. The Russians are also making their preparations with the Armenians. They just had 2 series of joint exercises, bilateral exercises between Armenia and Azerbaijan, pretty much on the scale same or greater than the Azerbaijani-Turkish exercise that happened. So that's where we are. Preparations are happening.
Okay, let me turn our attention a little bit, because we're also on the subject of Russia, that this past week we saw Russian oligarch Mikhail Khodorkovsky. He has a website called Dossier.center, and it published another document, this time about how Russian intel operates and influences Armenia and Azerbaijan. It named a lot of names, and to most analysts there was nothing earth-shattering, but still the press, especially the Armenian press, is all aflame with this information. What's interesting about this document?
Well, one thing to keep in mind is that this document is not about Russian intelligence work. It's about Russian government work. Essentially, we're talking about the president's office, President Putin's office, and the specific individual who basically oversees Russian government policy in the former Soviet space. His name is Chernov. I forget the first name.
Yes.
Chernov is a former. I mean, probably still has a rank, but previously he was working in the foreign intelligence at the at the Russian embassies abroad. But currently he's a government official, Putin presidential administration official. So what it tells us about Russian policy in the former Soviet space is that it's dominated by former or current foreign intelligence officers. Desk officer for Armenia, who's actually an ethnic Armenian, I think the name was Dmitry Avanesov. He's actually a military colonel, so he's a military serviceman, basically handling Russian policy towards Armenia, sort of being sitting on that desk. So what it tells us is that Russian policy in general is heavily militarized, heavily securitized, and from the work that they're trying to do, to organize conferences, to organize maybe provide sort of Russia-friendly commentary injected into the press. Something that much easier done with sort of private foundation or private think tank than it is with foreign intelligence or people in epaulets that naturally create kind of tension around them when they're trying to work in the civilian sphere.
The question I have is, how reliable and trustworthy are these materials, and is it possible that these are not entirely accurate?
Could be something not entirely accurate, but I mean it seemed fairly accurate as far as. There was not too many surprises. People were mentioned there that sort of work for Russian interest have been known for a while. What needs to be kept in mind, though, is that a person who is a target of Russian interest, Russian government interest, is not necessarily cooperating with them. So somebody might be mentioned in those papers as an object of interest of Russian government, or maybe just a person they contacted. That does not mean that these people are working for the Russian government or Russian intelligence. So that's something that's sometimes lost by people who cover these issues. And of course, you can unduly damage somebody's reputation by just having their name mentioned in something like this. So that needs to be kept in mind and needs to be stressed. That just the fact that somebody is of interest to the Russian government does not make them Russian operative.
I also didn't find that much interesting. All the names were kind of, no big surprises. But is there anything interesting about the timing of this document? Why now?
Well, they've been publishing this information for a while. Last few weeks, they initially published the part. My understanding is somebody hacked into this Chernov's computer and just managed to get some of these files, and they've been publishing them. They're fairly recent. It looks like they're talking about events from last year, and maybe even some events from this year. So, they organized them into stories and found, sort of selected what they thought was most interesting, what might be most, sort of a hot type of subject matter. But Khodorkovsky is part of sort of Russian opposition politics, and this is a way to kind of undermine Putin on the marginal issue. It's not going to be a big deal, and especially now with the Navalny situation, that's such a minor issue compared to what happened with Navalny. But I guess they had this stuff prepared in advance, and they just had decided, since they already put some work into it, might as well release it.
Very good. Okay, we're going to move from the Moscow scene to Washington, D.C. On Friday, the news broke out that former Senator Bob Dole has registered as a foreign agent for Armenia in Washington and has been hired by the Embassy of Armenia with the goal to quote-unquote foster improved diplomatic relations between Armenia and the US. Bob Dole is 97 years old and has always been a friend of Armenia and Armenians, and is charging what seems to me a nominal $10,000 for a month of work signed as of September 15. Is this a first, Emil?
I was trying to figure out whether there was another hiring like this where Armenian embassy would hire a professional lobbyist or a lobby shop in Washington. I can't remember it. Some people suggest that it might have been a case back in the 90s. What we have had one experience actually is when an entity indirectly connected to 𝐶ERJ Sargsyan hired a lobby group, a Burson Marsteller, before 𝐶ERJ Sargsyan's run for presidency, and sort of promoted 𝐶ERJ Sargsyan and brought in, I think the name was Jack Black, one of the top Republican lobbyists to Armenia. They, did some work for the Armenian genocide resolution, etc. So those things happened. But one thing to keep in mind is that this is just the way the system in Washington operates. By the very fact that the Armenian embassy, Armenian government had not been an investor in the system by basically hiring lobbyists and maintaining lobbyists, Armenia is seen as an outsider to this political process. The Armenian American advocacy organizations are not in the same position as professional shops staffed with former officials, professional lobbyists, to be able to deliver similar results. First of all, they're not funded by the Armenian government, so they cannot really be taken to task by the Armenian government for not doing something that the Armenian government wants them to do. So it's a very, very important natural progression in the foreign policy of Armenia to be able to hire a lobbyist in Washington. So this is a very kind of small contract. Hopefully, it's not going to be this is not going to be the end of it, and hopefully there is going to be a robust Armenian lobbying presence in Washington, Armenian government lobbying presence, because otherwise there's no other way to achieve results.
There seems to be a specific target for this one hiring. I'm not sure what that is.
I'm sure there's has something to do with the congressional calendar, maybe election calendar as well, but most likely it has to do with congressional calendar, because that's what you need lobbyists for.
One of the articles that I read mentioned the U.S.-Armenia strategic talks that have started this week and are continuing into next month, I think. So the article about Bob Dole's hiring as a foreign agent for Armenia, and those talks were mentioned basically in the same article, possibly linking them. Are you aware of any kind of linkage?
I'm not. I haven't, looked into this in any great detail. It's just, like I said, most likely the initiative for this comes from the Armenian ambassador here, Varjan Nersesyan, and this has been long overdue. I can only welcome this hiring to, reinforce Armenia's position and role as a participant in sort of this political process that happens here every year and every day.
All right. Well, there's a lot more to talk about, but for now we'll leave it there. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes our program for this week's Groong Weekend Review. Please contact us with your feedback and suggestions. You can do so on our website at groong.org, that's Groong, or on our Facebook page, ANN-Groong, or on our Facebook group, Groong-Armenian News Network. Special thanks to Laura Osborne for providing the music for our podcast. I'm 𝐿𝐫𝐸𝐺𝐚, and on behalf of everyone in this episode, thank you for listening, and we wish you a good week.